Whenever you are ready, Mr. Chair.
Good evening. It's 7 o'clock for the Mansfield Conservation Commission's special meeting on July 12th. I'm Michael Soares, Chair of the Conservation Commission. Let's see, just a quick roll call. We have Erin King, who is our Vice Chair, Chad Rittenhouse, our Secretary, May Harper. I believe that's it. Absent are Will We Met, Chandu Athrana, Miranda Davis, John Silender, and James might be joining us shortly. So let's jump ahead to item 2, which is our minutes.
James is here, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yeah, James. Hey, James. James, we were just on item 2, which is the minutes from our last meeting of May 17th. I was not here, so I don't really have any comments. I don't know if anybody has a motion to accept the minutes or any motions at all on the minutes before we discuss.
John's here.
Okay, John is here as well. Hi, John.
Oh, perfect. A full 4, 6. Wow,
It's
almost full.
in July even. That's great. Any comments on the minutes or a motion to approve them as written?
So
Second. Aaron, second. Any further comments or discussions on those minutes from May 17th?
I'll just say with apologies, I think I spelled a few people's names wrong, but I wasn't able to chase them down. So if anyone in the public reads those, sorry.
Is that where you put question marks next to
Yeah.
people's names?
Yes.
So,
you got most of them correct.
Close enough.
okay. All those in favor of this motion of approving the minutes? I guess if you're remote, you could raise your hand, and if you're here, just say aye. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Anybody abstaining? No. Motion.
One for you, Mr. Chair, since you weren't present, or
I will abstain. That's
Okay.
yeah, I will abstain. I mean, that's not a big deal.
Mhm.
I will. So unanimous with my abstention. Okay, so item 3 is public comment. Is anybody here to speak in general to the commission, or we all are here for agenda items, I'm assuming? Okay. No old business, so to item 5, which is the 95 Lease Road request for work within a conservation easement. Is there somebody who wants to speak? I know there's a bunch of you here on behalf of that item. Does anybody in particular want to speak to it?
Sure, I can go first, unless you wanted to, Mike. Yeah, so Lisa is working with All Forest Products and Mike Bartlett's here representing them, and then with Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'm a forester for NRCS, and so she got a forest management plan through one of our programs, and Mike's the forester who wrote it, and my job was to review it and help set her up with some cost share funding to improve the health and wildlife value of the forest, control invasive species, and then we an identified conservation easement area. We looked at the text of the conservation easement, and it's I think as it's written right now within the conservation easement area, there's no tree cutting allowed, no at least chemical methods for invasive plant control are allowed within the conservation easement area. And Mike and I both think that there's opportunities to do some forest stand improvement to increase the resiliency and the wildlife value of the forest within the easement area. And then I identified some invasive plant issues within the easement area that I think would benefit from chemical control. So we wanted to, I think what we want to do here is discuss options, for what we could do. Changes to the easement or wherever those options might take us. The way I see there's a broad range of opportunities between available to us. We want to hear what what the Conservation Commission thinks about maybe making some amendments.
Yeah, to give you, I guess, a little better idea, and as far as the treatment that's been proposed for the property, for the most part, is what I would call an improvement thinning. Kind of taking out the poorest quarter to a third of the trees that are, losing the battle for sunlight, so to speak, already. It's kind of, much of the site is like we see all over this area, it's heavier to black oak, a little drier site. A lot of our black oaks are declining for a couple of reasons, age is one, and then the climate change, the gypsy moths, all of these pests that are coming through. So if we can take steps to make it a little healthier and maybe a little more resilient down the road, that's what I'd like to do, so. And, Lisa got involved with this because of the aspect too, for Audubon has done a report on the property to enhance the wildlife habitat for birds and other animals as well, through the forest management.
Okay.
I
Not
have,
related- okay.
yeah, I have maps, if you'd like to see, of the property that shows the total property, and then the cross-hatched area is the easement area.
I could bring up the entire forestry management plan on the
Oh,
screen if
yeah,
folks would
okay.
want, so I put that in the packet. Lisa is on screen as well, the property owner, Lisa Harris, is there. Wrote us the cover letter to explain her intents, and she can also speak. I'll just pull up the forestry management plan here, which will take a moment to load. Staff started talking with Lisa a couple months back about the process that we would need to go through in order to allow this to happen. Normally, conservation easements tend to be written as a no-touch zone, right? But because the purpose of the conservation easement being put in the first place was to protect the value, and now we have a very comprehensive report detailing ways in which we might be able to improve the value by doing work. There's a release valve in the way it's written that says that if the grantor comes before the town and says, we want to do this, and it's approved by Conservation Commission, it goes to Planning and Zoning for referral to the town council, it can be approved. So this is the first step to get your role as the professional body, semi-professional, volunteer, elected, whatever you happen to be, for getting this release done. So we had the whole management plan done, and the blue bar is slowly, ever so slowly taking up. Tonight, the applicant is looking for your advice, recommendations, and anything that you may want to send to Planning and Zoning for them to consider when they propose moving this for town council consideration.
So I think for me, there was two questions. One is just sort of talking about the forest management plan itself. But I think before that is sort of the working with the easement. And so, Mike, I tried to quickly read through the conservation easement language before
Yes.
the meeting. So I just want to be sure, because I used to work for land trusts on monitoring easements, and a change to an easement sets a precedent that has a lot of gravity to it.
Yes.
And so I just want to be super clear that the easement is written in a way that explicitly allows activity, because there are phrases in there which prohibit this activity. And
Right.
I'm all for the activity. It's the precedent on our conservation easements that I'm more
Absolutely.
concerned with.
So just gonna pop out the easement in a new tab here. But the way that the easement is written, now I'm not an attorney, but which I have to preface anytime I try to give any sort of legal reading of anything. But section 2 here notes that the grantor makes covenants that without express written consent from the grantee, all of the following activities are prohibited, which means no removal or destruction of trees of any kind or dead trees, no dumping, no topo changes, all of those good things. However, any request for written approval for uses and activities noted above shall be accompanied by a detailed statement of purpose and specific plans. And the grantee, the town, has the right to approve such changes in use, provided that it is found they do not interfere with or have an adverse impact on the natural, scenic, ecological, and open space values being protected. So you're absolutely right that there are laws that say you basically can't modify an easement that would give someone any sort of benefit if this doesn't exist, but fortunately, this one was written with that language.
And so that written approval, as you said, just to confirm, is coming from planning and zoning.
I believe it has to come from the town council. Some easements are written in such a way that planning and zoning is the delegated authority, but I haven't found one here. I actually have a meeting with the town attorney tomorrow, and I'm going to,
I think you're probably right.
on my agenda of, is it part of the delegated powers of PCC, but I think it has to be on the town council.
Yeah.
So the timeline for that is probably looking at September, is what we're looking to try to get their approval. For the forestry work, when were you, when Lisa and I talked about that, but what was the timeline plan for some of this work to be done?
It hasn't gotten very far yet, so I don't
Right.
see that as being an issue.
I could speak to that a little more. So Lisa is planning on applying for financial assistance through NRCS for the work. So she decided she wanted more time to work all this out. So she's not going to even put an application in until our fall application period. So probably about October of this year. And then it's competitive funding, so she might not even get funded. But if that were to happen, the funding would come through like springtime 2024. And then the work, the first step would be invasive species control, which, earliest time frame for that would be summer 2024. And then the forestry work could happen like fall 24, winter 25 timeframe. That's at the earliest. Now, there might be other delays with our processes that push it back a year. So.
All right, thanks. Does any commission members have more questions about sort of the legality of it? I mean, we can talk a little bit more about the plan itself. Anybody have more follow-up on this part?
So I do, and so the way that this is written, it sounds like it's just a permission process, but is this blanket permission? So forest management plan is in effect for a certain period of time, they can come back. Do they need to make a new request, or is everything that's within the scope of the plan what we're approving at this point in time?
So that's a good question. And I think a valid recommendation to make to planning and zoning in
Also
terms of
typing.
your comprehensive recommendations are always helpful. Could be however the town council grants it. Limited time approvals tend to be, in staff's opinion, better for ensuring the integrity of an easement.
Does the forest management plan kind of give a sense of the complete timeline to implement the plan? Or is it kind of a rolling
It's kind of-
implementation?
Yeah, exactly. With if issues such as this that come up, so
Yeah.
causing and the funding and so forth. So it's not written in stone, I guess, time wise.
I mean, once it gets started, is it like a finite 6-month period or
Right.
1-year period?
Yeah, I would say probably to be safe, a year. We have to work around weather somewhat, along with the restrictions with the plan in terms of working in the summer months with some of the endangered species concerns. So.
Yeah, I would put a time frame would probably be 2 to 3 years if all the invasive plant control activities are factored in. Because it's usually on that property, it's going to be 2 to 3 years. So you do treatment 1 year and then you come back a year later for anything you missed or anything that sprouted up in the meantime. So that's another consideration.
Repeated follow-up on
Yeah.
invasives. Because I think Chad brings up an excellent point about the timeline of implementing and completing the project and what is the town actually approving? Is it my understanding is it would be the scope of what's written, the written forest management plan. And so there might be a time that's specified in the plan that it's not likely to exceed X number of months or something like that. Because if there is follow-up work 5 years later, it's related, but I'm not sure it should be as wide open as that to allow sort of, many years later follow-up work. That might be a new request, a new written request. Mike, touching on your point.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one could envision a scenario where a plan is written for 100 years and every 20 years there's entry in the stand, and functionally then it's,
Well,
we're granting permission beyond the. So I'm not saying that that's the case here, but I think that's an important question, is what is the duration of permission? Is it for the scope of activities that's described? And then we impose. I'm familiar with forest practices. My graduate work, some of it was in Wisconsin, and winters are not always favorable for harvest, particularly in our New England winters where we're bouncing above and below the freezing line. And so typically those, when you bid on acreage you're putting that bid is in effect for 2 years or 3 years, but then after that, like, all bets are off. So you don't get into the stand then. So I would say there's both the duration of the permission as well as that kind of, what's the scope of activities and the duration of those activities being conducted.
and not to constrain it necessarily, but just to maybe put bookends.
Put
on
a,
it,
put a,
as a way to-
a reasonable bound.
create a finite time period where a new request would be required.
So it's not a blanket permission in perpetuity.
Just.
John, you have something?
Yes, since I have some experience with this, typically forest management plans, that go through NRCS are 20-year plans. And I would recommend one of the new programs that's come in from the NRCS is the Biodiversity Stewardship Program. And that one is focused on enhancing biodiversity in forest settings. That's one that I actually am participating in here, and I would recommend that. And I only say the 20-year period because it may be vast periods of that time where nothing's happening, but the forest does grow and change over that period of time, and one can sort of incorporate. And that's what I have here is biodiversity. Focused on biodiversity management of the forest that I oversee, and includes a whole bunch of different things, creating openings, increasing, nesting sites, and a whole range of things. Also, increasing the biodiversity there through in-planting of other species that should be in the area that maybe not. Dealing with regeneration of oaks, which is very difficult without sort of large openings. Pollinator gardens, a range of different sorts of things that can come under sort of the scope of the biodiversity stewardship program.
So I think a good way of looking at it is we don't know when it would start. Maybe it's 2024, maybe 2025. But once it does start, there's a pretty specific time period of 2, maybe 3 years, even more specific, outline of activities. Like there will be a forest improvement thinning, there will be one thinning, and then there will be unless some catastrophe happens, there'll be a long rest period for the forest. So if there's a way to limit it either on that, maybe not specify a start date, but specify the activities or a time frame from when the first activity starts.
That makes sense. Anybody have other thoughts on the plan itself or other aspects of Chad's comment or the comment so far about working on a town easement?
So one other consideration would be follow-up treatments, monitoring for invasive species. Because one of my primary concerns for Lisa is the wonderful old beaver meadow that she has is basically free of invasives right now, but the next wetland upstream from her is almost completely covered with Phragmites. So one of the reasons I was pushing her to get permission to do invasive species control in the easement area is, in the case of Phragmites does spread down, which is likely to, it spreads very well. It's something that you really want to, if you can catch it early, you can have really high effectiveness in controlling it. So it's another consideration, like, if 5 years from now they discover Phragmites there, or invasive plants start coming back into the forest, is that something where she would need to go through this process again? Or is that something, for long-term follow-up, if that's something that could be worked into the existing permission?
But as far as you know from the site, there aren't invasives in that area yet, or from
So
site walk so far?
there's no Phragmites in the wetlands, but there is barberry, winged euonymus, a lot of like woody invasive shrubs on the edge of the wetland into the moister parts of the forest. So, and actually, like, one of the reasons I'm encouraging her to do this is that the invasive plants, they're actually concentrated within the easement area. You get in more of the uplands outside the easement area, and it's much less of an issue.
Yeah, it's a little multiflora rose thrown in out there, probably more
Yeah.
barberry than anything else.
Yeah,
And that's not really in the Beaver Meadow, it'd be up into this wetland feature to the west of the Beaver Meadow or pond there.
yeah. And then the southeast corner has it.
Oh,
The east side of the wet
Yeah.
Beaver Meadow has it. It's all around the edges in the wet area.
yeah.
So as some of you probably know, like our charge is an advisory group to inland wetlands and planning and zoning, and really about conservation of wetlands and water courses and water bodies. And I think so that's one part of, we don't look at a lot of forestry plans here, tend to look more at development, and so we see silt fence and we see wetland crossings, and we see all that really specified in a plan. So I'm just, the two activities that would like to hear more about in terms of protection of water would be, it's a pretty large wetland, so just how that is crossed, and then the other part is just mechanical versus chemical treatment of invasives, especially within the bounds. In our wetlands delineated for forest work, they're flagged out ahead of time. They're not. Okay.
No, we generally will, occasionally work in wetland soils, wetland sites, but it's certainly limit the amount of our activity in those areas. In this case, we're not planning on doing any entry with machinery on any of the western portion of the property. So
far
this thing
western
of the
part.
far west finger there, yeah, that area there, we're not planning on doing any
So your access is up through the driveway.
for the driveway as far as crossing
So
any
no,
wetlands.
no
There's
crossing
crossing.
through wetlands.
No, and-
that once
right.
you're up in the work areas.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there is another wetland feature right in that southeast corner as well, and again, we don't plan on really getting into that. It's a very saturated site, and there is some wind throw occurring already in there. It's pretty heavy to sod maple, typical wetland.
Towards the cellar hole?
So, yeah, just south of the cellar hole there, there's a little wetland feature there.
So you don't think,
There's no
have to cross
wetland in
that.
that area. There's no wetland in that area.
no, just what it says an intermittent stream.
So you're talking about the
Oh,
dash line?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a stone wall. You're looking at the other blue dash line you can't even see.
Yeah, my bad.
Yeah.
Really straight.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Oh.
Okay. So no likely vehicles that have to
Go into
use
any
mats or
wetlands.
anything across through wetland areas or anything. Okay, great. And so how about the, treatment of invasives in wetlands? Just as a general practice, I'm just curious how that's normally.
I can answer that one. So that would be, since the primary species, invasive species here is Japanese barberry. So anyone, since NRCS is providing funding for this, Lisa would be required to hire someone who is a licensed applicator with the state of Connecticut so that they follow all the regulations about, staying away, operating, applying these chemicals at a time of year and in a manner where it's not going to get into surface water. So typically in these forested wetland areas, they wait until the water table drops and there's no surface water there. And then they'll apply a foliar chemical spray. Typically it's used with a backpack sprayer. So they go around the spray in each plant individually. There's now what's most commonly done is the application method. It's called Thinvert. So it's a very low dose, and it's not mixed with just water. It's mixed with these different chemical formulations that cause it to stick to the plant leaves much better than the typical aqueous solutions that were used in the past. And what that also does is you don't have to cover the entire leaf area of the plant. So you can be much more precise in hitting the target plants, and you can be much more careful about just hitting like a couple different branches on one plant versus trying to cover the entire leaf area. And that keeps more of it onto the leaf area. There's less that misses and falls onto the soil or hits non-target plants. That's it's not a requirement that they use that method, but that's what I'm seeing done, especially in those areas that are a little more difficult to access where you are using a backpack sprayer, because just the volume of liquid that you're bringing with you is much, much lower because it's got the very low dose concentration.
Okay, so there's no mechanical treatment. I'm not criticizing.
No.
It's just using the backpack sprayer to target the plants that are found.
Yeah, because with barberry, especially barberry of this, it's not of any extreme height. It's waist level at most. So with the mechanical treatment, you could cut it down, but then you'd have to get an effective chemical treatment, you have to allow it to resprout to a similar height. So there's really not much difference in doing that. And it's at a height where they can effectively apply it. And just mechanical control on its own with plants such as barberry is it's really not effective. Their root systems are so resilient. Even if you cut them 5 years in a row, they're still there, just waiting for you to miss a year.
Yeah.
And in the back, and then it's back to where it was.
The 1 year you take a break.
Yeah.
It all jumps back.
Yes.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, John, you have a question?
Yes, the most effective way to treat barberry is cut the stumps down and then paint it with a kerosene mixture with the herbicide in it. That's what the most effective method is.
So we've found that's really not a cost-effective solution for landowners. If they're hiring someone to do it, just the amount of labor involved with that many, because barberry, there's so many stems. It's a multi-stem plant. It's just they can't find anyone to do it using that method.
I've done it here on 200 acres. It took 2 days of effort by a team. It can be done.
Maybe Lisa would be interested in hearing who did that work for you. Because I mean, at the end of the day, that's an effective method of control that would meet her contract requirements with NRCS. Provided.
This is in Michigan where I'm doing this, so not in Connecticut. But, the problem is we've done repeated aerial sprays, and it's over 5 or 10 years even of repeated sprays. It doesn't kill them. Of just foliar sprays.
Well, I'm not sure what methods they're using. The contractors we work with, they have very, very high kill rates, 95 to 100% with the Thinvert application they're using here in Connecticut. So I'm very confident that it will will be effective here.
Does the plan and is there an invasive species plan, or that's more embedded in the forest management plan?
It's embedded in the forest management plan, and then on our end, once Lisa files her application with us, then we'll devote more staff time to getting more into the details of that. I mean, that's something we could share with you, but it's more of an assessment of the geographic location, the density, and then so we can determine the proper cost share rate to provide to her. I mean, we could share that information with you. It may not be the most useful information for you, though.
I was just curious if it recommends the way the treatment is conducted as a way to sort of, like the best control practices selected or required, or like cut and paint or targeted spray, or rather than just a licensed applicator can be brought in and then they can choose whatever they feel is convenient or cost effective for them.
So we don't get that specific because we don't want to lock the landowners into a specific application type, because there are because once it's in their contract with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, can't really be changed. So our specifications are somewhat broad in terms of have to use a licensed applicator. There has to be 95% or greater effectiveness. And then we list a number of different application methods. So foliar, there could be a mechanical, like what John was describing was a basal bar treatment. So that is a method that's permitted. It's usually done in it's usually in Connecticut, it's done more so on vines. Because you can't actually get to the foliar area of the vines that have climbed the trees.
Sure.
So just to preserve all the options for the landowners, we don't specify something like that.
Okay.
But if there were, that might be something we could potentially do if that was the town of Mansfield wanted to limit certain options. That's something we could explore further if necessary.
Any other questions or comments?
I just want to full disclosure that I currently work for NRCS, so I probably won't vote on any of the motions, and I'm just kind of here just observing for now. Yeah.
Any other commissioners have questions or comments, or I think Chad's been working on something, but if anybody has a motion of some kind or elements of a motion they want to share.
Self-share and make sure that you should have rights, I think.
So it's a little sparse. And right now, it's just about trying to identify issues around duration of permission and scope of activities. So I don't have any language around like we generally support this or anything like that yet. So let me throw up there what I have. Make sure I pick the right teeny tiny window. Just send this stuff a little further down the screen. Uh-oh, did I do that?
No, that's. I'd like to focus this, remove that pen as well. Nope, that's just John now, okay. There we go, swapped it, perfect.
So this first item here captures this question of what is the duration of permission? Is it issued for the length of the forest management plan, potentially a decade or more, or for the proposed activities? The barberry treatment, stand improvement treatment. This is what I'm gonna recommend under A, or what we could recommend, proposing we recommend, is that the duration of permission is from the project start date to a maximum of 3 winters and 3 growing seasons, which allows for potential to conduct stand improvement over multiple winters. And invasive treatment and retreatment over several growing seasons. Now, that number, I'm certainly willing to consider if that's of sufficient length that allows for multiple entries in both winters and growing seasons. The second thing is, what is the scope of permitted activities? And I'm saying treatment of invasive species, including but not limited to barberry. You mentioned, Mr. Bartlett, winged euonymus, and multiple rose was mentioned as well. So I don't know that we want to just say only barberry. And then standard forestry procedures for stand improvement, including limiting activity on wetland soils and water. And there's probably a whole list that we could develop that would be captured under standard forestry procedures, but
Yeah,
that one was
there's a whole book.
mentioned.
We don't need to.
Entire degree programs.
Yeah.
So that's what I have so far. And so I'm receptive to comments and feedback and suggestions and all of that. And whether we should put something up top about if we're in support of it or not.
Yeah, I would say, we don't have, I don't know how explicit we have to be, but just assuming that our understanding, our interpretation of the easement is correct, that permission can be granted by the town. But that's, I think you're correct, Michael, and I think we're correct in interpreting that way, but not to assume that that is the process. That they need to check on their past precedents, or perhaps with the attorney, or perhaps with Jennifer, just to confirm that is the process that the town, or they've had that discussion and determined that.
Jennifer and I have spoken about it. We're pretty sure it has to go through the standard conservation planning town council process, but I will speak to Kevin Deneen tomorrow at our meeting, just to clarify that this language seems to imply that standard progression. So that's how we tend to go with our even modifications if they concur.
It is exclusive to this project.
Yes.
Has anyone ever approached the commission for something like this before?
So yes, so there are actually at the commission's June meeting, there is an easement that our next conservation easement monitoring event. There's a 10-acre easement that explicitly granted planning and zoning the power to modify in the easement with certain permissions. They had approached specifically to be able to remove various things like old farm equipment that was broken down that was in the easement since
Very
buying it.
restrictive.
It was extremely restrictive.
The one at Mount Hope.
Yes,
Yeah.
the easement for that,
property.
the easement for that was so restrictive that it goes into the element of how are you expected to do anything with the property, which, you know, it is a conservation easement, but problematic. So that is the beginning of a process, and the commission granted a very narrow allowance in June. So that is something we're getting used to. I've only been here 5 months. I really can't speak to what happened before.
I don't remember.
I don't
coming
remember
for
either.
any easement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
remember that forever. It's the longest.
Yeah, I can't say I've had this particular idea of a sort of a ecological
Conservation
improvement
practice.
on an
Yeah.
easement that's come to us and sort of had to go through this process, but it does seem to be written out that way. The other question I have that maybe we add to the intro or some other part of this chat is the forest management plan the written formal request that is going to the town? Or, I mean, that certainly describes the activities. So just if unsure if the town needs anything else in addition to what the materials that we've been able to review.
Think that the way Lisa wrote the cover letter, so I had asked Lisa to write that cover letter to request that the forest management plan be considered. So we had to do a specific document requesting this, so I think it covers it.
Okay.
That's a very good point, because otherwise it's just a document floating in the ether.
Yeah, there's sort of the explanation of activities and then there's the request, but I think, yeah, it's. I read through the materials very quick, so I didn't read that as closely as I probably should have before we got here. Does anybody have anything they want to, any commissioners want to add anything to what Chad has
John,
drafted so
so
far?
John has had it, Mr. Chair.
John, go ahead.
Right. I think that the, 3 years is pretty arbitrary. And if you look at the NRCS programs, and I was just looking at the one I have, which is the Biodiversity Stewardship Program, that's a 5-year program. So it seems to me, I would certainly encourage the Biodiversity Stewardship Program, which sort of encapsulates a lot of what we would want to see as a conservation commission going on in this area. And similarly, I have sort of matching grants for in-planting of trees from NRCS. And, that again extends certainly over more than 3 years. It sort of depends on sort of availability of stock and, all sorts of other things, if there's going to be in-planting here.
Is there planting proposed?
No.
I think a 5-year program would be a more appropriate one. Not that you need 5 years, but some of these programs you sort of want to sort of say what would be nice to be able to do, not putting it off for 5 years, but that has been my experience in dealing with NRCS and having competitive with getting matching funds. Or being competitive in the program itself, if that's of some use. And it seems to me we should be encouraging sort of biodiversity enhancement here.
Yeah, I think
So I think 5 years is a more reasonable period of time.
what program, it would come-
It's the
what program
it's
is-
the biodiversity management program from NRCS.
I'm asking Eric what program Lisa is working with, or how did it come about?
So one of the issues here is that NRCS, what we offer can vary a great deal state to state. So what they have in Michigan doesn't line up 100% with what we have in Connecticut. So the program that Lisa is applying for is called EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. That's the only one that I recommend for her because of the invasive plant control, just the way that in Connecticut anyways, our payment rates that we can offer her, that's the only program that has a reasonable rate for the invasive plant control. What's the other program we have, which sounds like John's in something very similar to it in Michigan, is our Conservation Stewardship Program. That's a 5-year program. But the way we do things in Connecticut, when there's invasive plant issues, have the landowner do EQIP first. And then when all that work's done, and this is years in the future, and then we try and sign them up for the CSP program. But to get back to the time frame, I would say that, with EQIP, 3 years, if we can start it, not in a specific year, but have it start on the, with the initiation of the first activity, I think 3 years is kind of the minimum to not cause any interference with her contract. But if you were to say 5 years, that would obviously that would work well too. Kind of comes down to what the town of Mansfield's comfortable with for a time frame.
So I just want a time frame so that doesn't become this blanket. And then in 10 years, there's another entry, and in 10 years, another entry, and all of a sudden we have a forestry operation happening on an easement. So if 3 years would be viewed as the minimum, I'm okay changing it to 5, and but it would be from the project start date. You said initiation of activity.
Yeah.
And those are different.
What would you call the project start date?
She's approved, go.
Okay.
But
well-
don't you have a seasonal component that you said you wanted to start with something in the summer?
Yeah, so the invasive plant control, those activities have to happen during the growing season.
So that has to come first, and say you've got a grant in January, you can't do it. Your clock's ticking.
Yeah.
So I agree with him if initiation activities, if he's doing step 1. Because I think about it in my archaeological work, if I get an approval in January, it does nothing for me. Until June. So I get that.
So that's a good clarification. So I changed
Yeah.
it here from initiation of activity to a maximum of 5.
Okay,
Seems reasonable.
yeah,
And Eric, I understand like there could be other invasives that come in and like you're saying, talking about the Phragmites.
Mhm.
I just think since they're not on site yet, we don't have a clear plan on what the activity would be, that I think this will set the bar for doesn't have to be onerous, but it would be a written request, several
Yeah.
years down the road. If
Okay.
and if it's within this 5-year window, maybe that can be processed differently as opposed to a whole new written request, but
Okay.
I just think it's very, very clear what the plan is here and what the treatment and improvements are gonna be. If those species show up, 5 or 10 or 20 years later, then I think it would probably be. I think the town would be more comfortable. I'll speak for myself. I think I'd be more comfortable just sort of dealing with one scope of work and then addressing that second scope if that happens down the road.
okay.
Can I ask a quick question? Hi, Lisa here.
Yes,
And Eric, you probably have to answer this. As we monitor for the Phragmites, just in terms of monitoring, are there any encroachments to the easement language just to do the correct monitoring? Does that make sense?
monitoring is just walking your property and looking for Phragmites.
Okay, I just wanted,
No,
I wanted to clarify that out loud and make sure that my assumption on that was accurate.
but I'm just asking, do we agree that that's what monitoring is? It's just kind of walking the property and looking for it and identifying that it's present or absent?
That's what I would call it. So, but I think the other thing that, Lisa's gonna have to make clear to the people that you hire to do this work is on other properties where there's no types of restrictions, when they monitor, they're gonna walk it. But if they see something, they're just gonna kill it. Whereas, in this situation, that's sounds like that's not potentially not acceptable. I mean, if it's in an area that's already been approved for treatment and is still within the 5-year period, I don't see a problem there. But if you're saying like the Phragmites, that needs to be a separate separate approval, then Lisa would have to make clear to the people doing this work that it's just just visual monitoring. And then if you see something, report it, but don't treat it.
What about revising the plan to just say, I just don't want to make it a blanket open,
Okay,
but if you feel Phragmites is very likely to move into the property in the next 5 years,
yes,
I don't know what people think about that it's identified as one of the species that could be managed. Even though it is not, well, I mean, it's almost forest management, it's not quite forest management. I'm trying not to be restrictive, but also trying to just set some bounds on the whole thing.
So I put treatment of invasive species, including but not limited to Barbary winged euonymus and multiple rows. So one could read that and say, well, if they found Phragmites, that's an invasive species, it could be treated as long as it's within the 5 years of the duration of permission.
But that's just our minutes and what the town is gonna, the activities that are stipulated or provided by the applicant are gonna be what they follow.
When it comes to staff's motions that we write for final approvals through a land use board, we tend to structure it as consistent with all submitted application materials, such that if it's consistent with the forestry management plan and it is noted in the forestry management plan as one of the species that you're monitoring for, and then that would fall within the bounds, even if it's, I don't know that that plant is there, but that is one of the plants that we are aware of and concerned about. If it shows up, we can take care of it, as opposed, because it's unreasonable to say, I know what all the plants will be for 5 years, right? But we can make sure that language is consistent with the forestry management plan as presented.
I could add something, I could write something and add it to the plan if that would help.
I would say any invasives you want managed in that 5-year period should
Okay.
probably be named in
Yeah.
the plan.
I'd have to go back and look. The Audubon bird survey and bird habitat plan might mention that. I know they focus quite a bit on the Beaver Meadow. That was a real like biodiversity hotspot in terms of birds. So if it's not covered in there, I can add more. They might not have picked up on it because Phragmites is awesome property.
I tried to search for the word Phragmites, but because it's
I don't remember.
it's
seeing
like
it.
a scan
Okay.
PDF, it won't pick up any words,
Oh.
so I can't check for you. Yeah, I just think it would. Yeah, I think it would help to add, and if there's others, when you get into that idea of like, let's add Phragmites, and if you think there's other woody shrubs or, potential things that are going to invade the Beaver Meadow, I would say,
Okay.
add them to the plan, and then, as Mike said, the town will be approving that language.
Okay. Is this something you need prior to the July 17th meeting?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
No, not necessarily. I will email you tomorrow.
Okay.
But
That
no,
works.
I don't think it's reasonable to ask for that on Monday. Planning and zoning may just decide, because we have a full meeting schedule, they may just decide to say, we'll receive this and thank you if you need to make modifications. We'll come back and discuss it in August. So we'll talk about that.
Okay, so what we don't have yet is a motion to, the motion. We've got some ideas, but we've got.
In-person chat is not as efficient with this.
I didn't mean that. It's summer, you can go slow you want. Take your time.
I'm lacking.
Creative
half
writing.
dozen screens.
No, I think just that sort of language that the commission, we make a motion that, or we're making a motion on these two ideas, right? One is that assuming permission can be granted, right? Assuming permission can be granted, then your item 1A that we recommend that there's a duration that is explicit. And then I guess we just have other recommendations beyond that for.
So in the
town to consider.
past, I'm trying to think of when we've made recommendations versus a motion. I think we've made recommendations in the past.
I think our recommendations, our motion is often, because we have, no statutory authority, our recommendations, our motions are our recommendations, I guess, or observations.
How's this?
You knew Dan seconded? That's
No.
I'll second.
All right. It's there as a motion. I'll move the text on the screen rather than reading it.
John and James and other commissioners, anybody have any further discussion on how this is written as a motion? And then we can vote on that.
I'll stop sharing.
Well, they might be.
Oh, were they reading it?
I was okay.
Gave us thumbs up.
James gave the thumbs up.
Okay. All right.
John, did you get to read that? Okay.
He's chewing it.
Yeah, I know. All right, so they're okay with that as written. So let's have a vote on that motion. Everybody, all those in favor of the motion as written, say aye,
Aye.
or raise your hand, please. Anybody opposed? Aaron, you're abstaining. So there we go. Okay.
So.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for the time. Ms. Harris, thank you
Yeah.
for joining us and for your input. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I want to say, I so appreciate that you take these things seriously. I think they're great questions. I think there's concern about precedent and all sorts of things. And I appreciate the support you guys are giving us to do the right thing by our woods and waters. So, just cheers, kudos, thank you. Reach out with any questions.
Thank you for making that investment in
Yeah.
our town and in your property. That's
Yeah, matters a lot to me. Yeah.
So we'll be in contact with you and you, Lisa, tomorrow, just to send you an email on our next steps and how we're gonna move forward.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night. Okay, we're on to item. We're on to item
See,
5B.
Yeah.
Green over.
Thank you so much.
Going on to
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
the application of Will Husky housing at King Hill Road for the hub at Mansfield. So this one, we have several people here, and like with these other recommendations, I see Tim Durko, and I thought we had Tim O'Neill, but we have various people here tonight. So anyone who wants to speak on behalf of the applicant, I imagine they have a presentation. Can invite them forward, and you're ready.
Yes, if anybody representing the applicant would like to speak, we can go ahead.
Great. I'll get us started. Thank you, Mr. Soers and other members of the commission. I'm Tom Cody. I'm an attorney with the firm of Robinson and Cole. And I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Will Husky Housing LLC. And you can also see on your screen Dean Gustafson, Senior Wetland Scientist with All Points Technology Corporation, and Tim Underko, Professional Engineer with Langen Engineering. And we also have Eric Wright, who is a Vice President of Construction for Wilmerite on behalf of the applicant. So this application includes 4 properties, 3 of which are on the south side of North Eagleville Road. 1 is on the north side of the street. And back in January, we met with you and you reviewed a wetland permit application for 2 of the 4 properties that are before you now. And so this project has evolved, but to give you a quick summary of what you looked at in January, this was a group dwelling, residential and retail restaurant mixed use project on those 2 parcels on that south side there. And Tim is now just running the cursor over those. You provided us with several recommendations, and then the Inland Wetland Agency held a public hearing. And in March of this year, they approved the permit application. Now, before we got going with planning and zoning, the applicant was able to negotiate control and contract rights for 2 additional parcels of property. The first is adjacent to the 2 parcels that you previously looked at. This is 125 North Eagleville Road. This, you more commonly might know this as the Sam's Club, the Sam's Food Stores rather, and Subway little commercial building there. So that property has been added to this application. And then across the street, the College Square Center across the street has been added to this. So we now have 4 parcels. And one of the key issues that I think you'll be interested in looking at tonight is that the addition of the 125 North Eagleville Road parcel changes this in a positive way, in that we were able to eliminate the driveway crossing over Eagleville Brook that you had noted and recommended that we find an alternative to making that crossing. So happily, the addition of this parcel enabled us to eliminate that crossing and to utilize the existing driveway which exists there today. With that, I'll pause and say that our presentation this evening will include a few slides. Tim Underko is going to run the presentation. He'll give you an overview of this revised project and some of the key details that relate to the regulated areas on the property. There are no wetlands or watercourses on the property. There is some off-site activity which brings the upland review area on the project site into question, and we'll look at that. And then Dean Gustafson will review the resources primarily associated with Eagleville Brook and describe for you some of the mitigation plans that we have developed for the project. So with that, let me turn it over to Tim and get started with the presentation.
Great, thanks, Tom. Michael, you did see Tim O'Neill on the Zoom earlier. He is attempting to fly out of Chicago, but a tornado has touched down in Chicago. So they are sheltering in the basement of O'Hare Airport as the tornado moves through the city. So he sent me a message that he had to drop off, but he was going to try and listen in. So he's dealing with some things right now. So I'll take the slides from him on this one. But Tim did present in January. I think Tom did a great job of highlighting some of the differences that we'll run through. Again, my name is Tim Underko, professional engineer and a principal with Langen, with our offices in New Haven. So we're going to split the slides up into two divisions here. Site A is the site south of North Eagleville between King Hill Road, and includes the new parcel here that is the Sam's Food and Subway. And then site B is the current location of Huskies on the north side of North Eagleville Road. I'm going to try and go quickly through most of site A since we've talked about a lot of this previously. Some site photos, so you can see the existing buildings that occupy the site. And then really kind of the most important resource is the section of Eagleville Brook that's on the north side of the property, off of the private land located within the North Eagleville right-of-way, call it the state of Connecticut / Yukon ownership. Here is the existing culverts that we spent some time discussing in January, where the previous application included an extension of these culverts so that there was the ability for the driveway to cross over from the property out to North Eagleville. We get into our resources and we have a map that looks like this. Green is the actual open channel of the brook. To the east, it is culverted. As it crosses North Eagleville Road, it is culverted. So there is an open air section. Wetland soils were identified around the perimeter, but it's really, call it an exposed bedrock open channel that conveys the brook for a couple of 100 feet. In yellow, we have the 150-foot upland review limit, and you can see the yellow hatch. That's the portions of the private land that fall within that upland review area. And then we added a purple hatch on both the north and south ends of the property to show where zoning requires the building to be, in this case with a maximum building setback as opposed to a minimum building setback. So we are required as a function of the zoning for the property to have the building limits very close to the north and south property line. So that is part of the reason that you see a development footprint that is near North Eagleville and near King Hill Road, as well as close to the resource of Eagleville Brook. So some hatches to give you a little bit of a legend there. And then we created another pretty graphic here that gives you an idea of what the development will include from protection of the resource, stormwater management. And in addition to the project that we did not have in January is a substantial amount of vegetated roof cover, and call it a green roof. At the time in January, we're still evaluating the building program, still working with the architect, and we've advanced the design where we have a good handle on area of roof that will be green to, again, help us lower stormwater runoff, improve the quality of that runoff. We still have an attenuation system, which is shown in the purple box here. And that is a function of, and you may be familiar with North Eagle, or Eagleville Brook is located within a TMDL, which is a total maximum daily limit set by the state to help improve water quality. That limit was really a function of building at UConn over the decades without significant thought to downstream water quality or quantity. And we have, as part of this development, made sure that we're meeting that limit that's applied to UConn projects for discharge to the brook. And that requires a minimum of a 21% reduction in runoff rate to the brook to help knock down the flashiness of the brook. And then we've incorporated a number of quality measures. And again, with the footprint of the building here, we have very little hardscape. All of the parking is inside the building. So runoff here is really a function of roof water, and in this case, a significant quantity of vegetated roof. As we keep going, we've got a full landscape plan as a part of the set. New trees, new shrubs, new ground cover anywhere we can. We do have some restoration that we're proposing in this area just south of the brook. I'll let Dean Gustafson run through that when the time is right, but we are doing enhancement to that existing slope and then providing anywhere where it isn't building or pedestrian pathway, new ground covers, new planting, and new trees. And I think that might be a good spot. Dean, anything that you'd want to add from either a resource standpoint or from the enhancement to this area? And actually, before you start,
Sure.
Tom mentioned it, but I didn't show it. In the January application, if you recall, the driveway for the project was, if I can draw a box, generally in this area here, and doing so required us to extend the culverts to kind of shorten the length of the open water stretch of Eagleville Brook. With the addition of the Sam's Food and Subway parcel, we're able to move that driveway all the way to the eastern end and not have that direct impact to the brook itself. We don't need to modify the existing head wall or the existing culvert. So I thought that was worth mentioning. I know Tom brought it up, but wanted to highlight it with the graphic. Dean, go ahead. Sorry.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Good evening, folks. Dean Gustafson, Senior Wetland Scientist, Professional Soil Scientist, Wall Points Technology, Waterford, Connecticut. Just a quick description on this section of Eagleville Brook. It's heavily incised streams, a couple of 100 linear feet of open channel. It is heavily, also the banks and some of the stream bottom are armored with stone and concrete. There's a spillway structure about midstream that is a concrete weir structure. UConn has a sampling implement monitoring station just upstream of that point. And there's generally very limited, if any, boring vegetated wetlands to the brook. Essentially, it's the jurisdictional boundary is essentially the ordinary high water mark of that stream system. The project will have a couple of 100 square feet of impact to the southern bank of the brook for the controlled outlet of the stormwater discharge. As Tim had noted earlier, there's a high level of renovation of stormwater from this proposed project. But we still need to provide an area for discharge back into the brook. So that's been designed properly to alleviate any energy or erosion issues, in addition to refining the water quality treatment. And as Tim had noted earlier, with respect to the enhancement of the buffer area for Eagleville Brook, the project does require to do some grading associated with that part of the site that's adjacent to this project area, and in conjunction with constructing the outfall for the stormwater feature. So there are some areas, it is a somewhat wooded area currently, particularly the western end. The eastern half is essentially a mix of some open areas, disturbed areas, and there's some dominance of some invasives, particularly woody invasives in the understory, multiflora rose, wing euonymus, etc. All your typical invasive shrub species. And there's a small patch of some Japanese knotweed close to the existing head wall at the eastern end of the brook. So some of the grading activities will mechanically remove some of those invasives. Where we don't have grading activity, we'll be using a stump cut and herbicide treatment technique to treat those invasives. And then we have a pretty good complement of native shrubs, trees, and conservation seed mix that we'll employ to provide enhancement to this buffer area to Eagleville Brook. Granted, with the existing anthropogenic changes to the brook and the surrounding development, the wildlife habitat functionality of this small little stretch of brook is fairly limited, but we see this as an opportunity to create some improvements for the buffer activity and also provide some enhancements to the brook, particularly from a water quality and, albeit limited, but also a wildlife habitat functionality standpoint.
Tim, before you continue, this is Tom again. Let me just point out by way of review that the land that is just north of the project site that lies essentially between our property line and North Eagleville Road, that land is owned by the state of Connecticut. And so the state retains jurisdiction for wetland permitting for its property. We will be submitting a water resources construction activities general permit registration for the activities that are on state property. And so technically, the application that's coming to the wetland agency in Mansfield is really for the private property work, which is limited to just upland review area impact. So there are no direct wetland or watercourse impacts on the private property of this project site. And so just to point out that distinction, Attorney Kevin Deneen has looked at that issue and back during the January-February timeframe concurred with that view that the state retains the jurisdiction over the state-owned property. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. And just for the commission's information, the project is undergoing a third-party peer review as part of the wetland application. CHA, who I believe did the initial application review, is back on the case. I think we're in a good place with them. We have our first round of comments. Most deal with kind of the minutia of stormwater analysis and maintenance post construction and some things along those lines that we'll be working through with them to get back in front of the commission, in front of the Wetland Commission. So that review is ongoing and we're working with them. We're able to satisfactorily address their concerns the first time around, and confident that we'll be able to get there with this application as well. So if we jump across the street to site B.
Well, we do have comments, but I don't know how everyone would like to kind of go through. I mean, my comments are very technical stormwater ones, which I'm happy to go through. But whatever you guys like to do. And then Rick, I can call, Rick is at another Zoom meeting tonight, but I can text him and have him jump in if we have wetland comments.
Why don't we let the applicant finish and then we can, I think, get to your comments are on site A, right? And not site B, or site A?
On
and
both
B?
sites.
Okay, so sorry for that. We're trying to figure out when the peer reviewer would have.
Yeah, no, that's great. Didn't know you're in the room. Hard to see who's sitting around the table on Zoom. So that's great. Yeah, I agree. I think most of the comments are technical. Not sure if there's I certainly don't have all the numbers in front of me to answer specific questions, but if you wanted to give a recap to the group, that'd be fine for me. So yeah, I'll try to run through site B similar to site A, prepared similar slides. I'll let Dean give a couple of seconds on what happens on the north side of North Eagleville. Again, some site photos just for orientation. Site is essentially fully developed today with existing building and parking. When we look at the resource in this case is as the culverts cross north, so flow is heading from east to west and then north and then west again. As the culverts come under North Eagleville Road, they daylight again, and we now have an open air channel section of Eagleville Brook. And again, that's located completely off of the private land, but the 150-foot upland review area is the yellow hatch, does encompass a portion of the property. Our purple hatch again across the eastern and southern side is the maximum building setback. So required in the zone to have the building close to both of those property lines to address the surrounding roadways. We get into a similar graphic on what are the things we're doing from a stormwater management standpoint. Again, a significant portion of vegetated roof, a below ground detention system to provide attenuation to help slow those peak flows, water quality units, some catch basins, a rain garden across the front, taking some of the walkway areas, and just trying to do everything we can within the remainder of the site outside of the building footprint to again meet the TMDL requirements and provide some benefit. Today, the existing roof and existing parking is a direct pipe network. There is no attenuation. There is no quality improvement. All of the flow off the property heads to the south and heads to the west into the brook. So we think we're making significant strides from a water quality standpoint and a quantity standpoint with the proposed improvements over the existing condition. Again, a landscape plan that rings the outside of the building anywhere we have disturbance, and that isn't building or pedestrian walkway, new trees, new shrubs, and new ground cover. So a tight site here, looking to kind of redevelop the existing developed footprint and provide improvements where we can on all sides. Dean, anything to add on the open air section of the brook just off the south and west of us?
Yeah, sure. So, this section of Eagleville Brook, the outfall from these culverts underneath North Eagleville Road, there's a significant elevation change from the inverts of those pipes to the actual elevation of the stream. Those pipes discharge onto a fairly large concrete splash pad, and then drops down into the actual stream bottom elevation. So this culvert impedes any type of fish passage further to the east. It is also that section that that kind of quick turn to the west in that stream segment, that area, especially that northern bank of the stream, is heavily armored with stone. There's really no bordering vegetated wetlands within this delineated stream segment. There's an existing stormwater outfall from the existing facility that'll be used for the improved stormwater management system. There's no need for an upgrade for that head wall, so there's no direct impacts to Eagleville Brook for Site B. We are proposing some upland review area enhancements in this area. That there really isn't any significant invasives, woody invasives particularly. That area was actually looked like it was landscaped somewhat recently within the past 3-4 years maybe by Yukon. There's some native trees and shrubs in there, so we'll enhance that program, provide a little bit better diversity and density of native species to try to improve some of that buffer between the proposed development and the head wall for Eagleville Brook.
Great, thanks, Dean. If that's what I pulled together for kind of the highlights of the two sites. Certainly open to question or discussion. Tom, anything to add in closing, or and turn it over?
Nothing else. That's a great summary. We're happy to continue the discussion with the commission.
Thank you for that. Is it Chuck?
Yes,
Do you want to speak to anything, or we could
sure.
fire questions at you, or you want to just kind of give a summary of your comments at this point?
Sure, and I just texted with Rick, and he said he was gonna try and log in shortly here. So, yeah, a lot of the comments are technical, like the size of this pipe on the plan doesn't match the calculations, so you just need to review them and sync them up. But in general, this project is really kind of nice in that it's not your typical development project where you have a development and half of the property is building and the other half is parking. In this case, the parking is incorporated into the building, and they haven't done rooftop parking. So all of that potential pollutant load is kept within the building, would then go to the sanitary sewer system where it could be properly treated. So the addition of having the green roof, I think, is also a great asset. You really do have the potential to get some nice clean runoff from the site. And then when you combine that with the BMPs that they're proposing, it really is nice for the site. The only detriment of developing the site to basically the property lines is that you really have no ability to infiltrate or recharge the groundwater. In this case, there's a lot of ledge, and when you get down to Eagleville Brook, you have some higher groundwater areas. So it's really it's not really feasible to be able to do infiltration and recharge with the way this is being developed, right? So I can try. Do you want me to kind of go through and like see? There were a couple comments. I know that, like, one of our comments was it would be nice to see some details for the green roof, because in the stormwater management report that was a big deal. And they kind of show the limits of the green roof, but there's no details as to what type of green roof. And I understand that the designers are still kind of trying to figure that out. So that could be something that needs to wait, but
there's a recommendation that to have a sort of a plan detail, or just more detail about the.
right now you just have a plan and it says like, this part's gonna be a green
Right.
roof.
So is your recommendation just that they provide
Or
a
some,
detail in the plans?
yes, just like a detail, of what type of green roof is it? Is it gonna be, what are the general?
What are the components? What are the plans?
Right. How is this gonna interact with the overall site stormwater system, kind of this sort of thing? So they are proposing hydrodynamic separators prior to the stormwater going into the underground chambers. The location of the separators are such that there could be some difficulty getting a back truck in there to clean them out. So that's something to maybe take a look at. The on site A, you have two sections. You have two hydrodynamic separators on site A, and it's not overly clear which sections of the roof are discharging to which separator. So it's kind of difficult to tell, okay, well, what's the overall flow going to be to each separator? And then the other aspect is do these separators need to be located offline such that when you have the higher peak flows going through them that are above the water quality flow, is it going to wash particulates out or sediment out, downstream because the flows are too high going through there?
I implicitly trust all of your recommendations, so not to cut you off, but I am cutting you off. But I guess-
No, this is right. I don't know how much detail you guys want.
No, and I enjoy it, but I think what I want to resolve that the applicant is going to address all of CHA's comments, and so we could go through them, or if there's disagreement about them, I think that would be important to focus on. But if there's agreement that they're going to address your comments in full, has the applicant had a chance to have a response yet, or is that coming to?
Yeah, so again, Tim Underco from Langen. Yeah, I don't think there's any comments that we don't think we're going to be able to reach an agreement on. We had a call today with the design team. As soon as we start talking about roof structure, it's not just the civil engineer anymore, it's the architect and structural engineer. So what does that detail look like? How does it impact the design of the actual structural framing of the roof? Those are things that we're working through so that we can give a coherent response back as part of the peer review. So I'm confident we'll be able to get there. I don't think there's anything in the comment letter that, we threw our hands up and said, no way, this isn't happening. We've also been speaking with the manufacturer of the hydrodynamic separator. We've been talking to the structural engineer about the units near the building. So we've got lots of gears turning on our side to try and get to some answers.
Okay, it's a short turnaround. I think that letter was last week. So it would have been great to see your comments back. We won't get a chance to see that, but I think as long as there's comments and consensus back to inland wetlands, then that's all we can. I would say that's what we would recommend, Chad, is just that the IWA has those comments and feels like consensus has been reached on all the peer review. Is there anything in particular you want to share with us, or does that sort of cover it?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I don't know if you had a chance to look at Rick's comments.
Starting
On which page to?
Yeah, just starting on which page of your letter?
The last two pages.
Okay.
Because I can't remember how many pages it is.
It's 7.
Okay,
Oh, wetland comments, that's what you mean, sorry.
yes. Rick's not on yet, I don't think. But none of our comments are deal breakers or, oh man, you gotta change
Okay.
something. So,
I think I have a question about, well, no, it's irrelevant because it's on state property. There is, I guess the state will review that, but it's the stormwater, it looks like the final outflow where there is a structure on site A, which is partially within the wetland boundary for Eagleville Brook. And so I think that's really under the state's review. But could you maybe just explain what that blue is and why?
Sure.
it partially
So, yeah, so the need for this is really a function of the existing construction of the channel. So because there is and if you recall, Dean mentioned the fact that there is a weir structure across the brook that UConn uses for monitoring. What that does is it actually backs up, it actually artificially raises the water elevation behind it heading to the culvert. And because of the location of our site, the elevations and the need to connect to the road, that rise in water was actually causing some negative effects back into our stormwater management system. And during the larger storm events, that flow could actually work its way backwards. So, and this was something we worked with CHA during the first application. We actually needed to discharge our water on the downstream side of that weir so that we were at a lower water surface elevation to keep that water from backing up into our system. So that's why you see an outfall here, as opposed to, say, trying to drill into the side of the existing culvert and eliminate this disturbance completely. We really needed to move the water far enough downhill so that we weren't getting negative effects from the weir that crosses the brook today.
Okay, I just, it is a concrete structure, or what actually?
No, it's a riprap splash pad. State calls it a preformed scour hole. Water would leave the pipe and there's actually a depression in the stone. It takes out the velocity, takes out the energy, and allows that water to kind of, call it, trickle into the brook itself. So not trying to create a point for the water to leave the pipe. The water leaves the pipe, is able to spread, reduce its height, reduce its depth, and reduce its velocity, and then it can continue on into the brook.
Yeah, and this is Dean Gustafson from All Points. Keep in mind the existing conditions is that at that particular location, and which dominates really the entire banks along this section of the stream, but in particular this area where we're reworking and providing riprap protection along that bank, and it's only a couple hundred square feet of impact. That's existing stone armoring. So we're really not changing existing conditions. We're just making sure that we're providing appropriately sized riprap to allow for appropriate dissipation of that flow. So we're still accounting for that as a direct impact or minor direct impact, but it really doesn't change existing conditions of the stream bank.
Is the stormwater system designed to handle a certain sized event? Like a 5-year storm, 10-year storm, or?
Yeah, I believe the modeling goes to the 100-year.
To keep the stormwater on site?
Just to be able to manage and meet the TMDL requirements. The water is discharged off-site, but we're trying to do it at a controlled rate.
Like, okay, because there's no infiltration on site. So
Yeah, you're in areas because of the brook. Groundwater is high. If you've walked out there, there are rock outcrops, there are exposed ledge. So, this isn't a sandy field where we're really able to push the water down. We are limited with the geology out there. So the idea here is we're going to take the water, collect it, and try and slow its discharge, again, to meet that TMDL requirement.
I have a quick clarifying question on that point. You guys hear me?
Yes.
So the modeling was done up to a 100-year storm, but that doesn't mean the storm system was actually conveying that, right? Like the pipes might have been at capacity at that 100-year storm. And I think you're using HydroCAD, which just presumes it disappears past the pipe if there isn't capacity. Like, were you looking at capacity?
What we typically do is the 100-year model is that in a storm that large, if we have a 100-year storm, you're going to be riding your kayak down North Eagleville Road. So it's what we're trying to prove is that in a storm of that level, our systems, specifically the detention system, are able to still manage flows. So we don't have a system that says, okay, in the 2-year storm or the 5-year storm, we are less than existing, but you get to the 10-year storm and now we're 200% of existing. We're able to keep that reduction on a global scale from the site. All
Understood that
to
completely.
100
Like that's like the runoff from the site. But I think the question that was asked is, can the pipes leaving the site handle the runoff? Like up to what point?
I would have to check the analysis. Typically, the pipes and the catch basins are sized somewhere between the 10 and the 25 year. That's the number you're looking for.
Perfect. Yeah.
Typically, the pipes that take your roof leaders or take a parking lot drainage are not sized for the 100-year. You would just be burying infrastructure that, once theoretically once in 100 years would actually, be able to convey that flow. But globally, across the site and as a detention system, we take that all the way up to the 100-year.
It's the only other thing I wanted to ask about is infiltration. It seems like, this is an area for build out pretty much for dense development. And the site does have ledge and shallow groundwater, but it seems like sites A and B really do not have any subsurface conditions that would allow for an infiltration practice. I'm asking either you, Chuck, or the applicant, if there's, because we all know that the TMDL is because of the impervious cover in Eagleville Brook watershed. So, well, if you don't, that's the driver for the TMDL. And so, just building out these properties, which is just wondering if there's another prudent alternative for putting pulses of stormwater directly into the brook without any kind of treatment. I mean, we have the hydrodynamic separators, but nothing else beyond that. I'll put it to the applicant first if you have any.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we do have along, so on site A, we do have a French drain trying to collect some water, perforated pipe. There's certainly the ability for that water to go into the ground. This entire site has ledge below it, so even if we infiltrate, it's going to hit the ledge. It's going to continue along the hydraulic gradient to the brook. So you may be hiding it, but it's still there running across the surface of the rock. We think that the addition of the green roof in this round of the application really kind of moves the needle from where we were in the prior application. Obviously, we still have some architectural and structural details to work through on what that system is. But we think for a site today that, both sites essentially very nearly fully developed, we're trying to make it better with the addition of the green roof, with the treatment, and the fact that there is a detention system to attenuate flows and try and knock those peaks down. Chuck, anything to add? We're trying to do everything we can here, but certainly, we are limited by the geology.
Is the geology the same for site B as well?
Yes, I think we may have a few more feet to bedrock on the north side, but we're not dissimilar. Really, no profile to do anything meaningful with infiltration.
Was that the geotechnical work was done on sites A and B, or just?
Yes, on both sites.
Chuck, do you have anything you want to add?
It's really based on the proposed development where you're really filling out the lot with the building and impervious area like this. Or I should say impervious area, I should say building. There really isn't, they really don't have an effective way of infiltrating. So you could try and force some infiltration where they have the detention system in the upper left-hand corner, but you're gonna end up causing problems because now you're taking all the water, trying to infiltrate it in one area. The area can become saturated. You do have slopes there. You're trying to keep everything stable. It's just not an effective way to try and do that. And they've tried to incorporate what they could as far as the French drains and things like that. But again, they're on slopes. It's just, if you want this type of development, this is kind of what you're stuck with. If the town was looking for something where your lot coverage is half of this, then yeah, you could probably poke around and find some areas where you could do some infiltration, maybe. But
you need a lot more surface area to accomplish something with a better subsurface.
right, you
Better
need
infiltration.
to be able to be much more flexible with where your building goes and stuff. And with this type of design, it's just not feasible. Thanks.
Yeah, and that, kind of dovetails back to, if I go back to kind of the site constraints, in this zone, we have to have building across both frontages, and where we have that frontage, we've got to be close to the street. So we don't have an open pocket that, okay, here's the ability to get an infiltration system. And again, we're going to find ourselves back to the rock and groundwater scenario in this case, but this zoning really is pushing for the density and the proximity to the front and rear lot line. But understand the question and the desire to do as much as we can, and we're hoping that we're getting there.
The side lot lines do they have the same maximum setback?
I don't know if they have the same maximum.
So there potentially could be. I mean, I think it's a pretty difficult site, but I think
Yeah.
your side setback could maybe, your building footprint could adjust, but I think it's still a difficult site either way. Anybody else have questions or, oh, sorry, go ahead, Chuck.
Rick Canavan just joined. He's our wetland scientist, our wetland reviewer. If you have any wetland questions.
Hi, Rick, how are you?
Hi, apologies for being late, coming from another meeting, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I get it. Do you have anything? We've talked a little bit in general about your notes, but is there anything that you want to stress or focus on?
No, I mean, a lot of my comments were kind of setting the record straight on some things that weren't necessarily like technical questions or design concerns, but although I made the comments, there weren't things that were particularly concerned about. I just wanted to make sure they were on the record of this application. I'm not sure if you talked about or I guess like making sure the quantities of impacts on and off, on the town reviewed parcel and on the state parcel just are accurately presented. Like the view you have up now, I'm seeing the discharge point to the brook. I'm not sure if you talked about that at all.
Could you talk to your assessment of that?
I guess I maybe had a question for the applicant about the grading through the bank of the channel. And if I guess would be helpful maybe to hear how they plan on building that, for one. I guess is like my bigger concern is like a construction period process for like, how you're gonna get equipment in there. I get, secondary question on that was, the area is gonna be planted heavily, which is awesome, but like, just making sure there's not a maintenance issue with needing to get something back into there in the future. So, that was one of my comments, I believe, was some to the extent of how is water handling going to happen in that space.
Was that a comment or an actual question to the?
It was a question to the applicant of there's construction proposed through the bank line of the stream, but the plans, at least that as far as I could see, there was no water handling or stormwater management at the limit of grading, was inland of it was upgrading of the limit of work. So just curious how that area is going to get constructed and how work is going to stay out of the water.
Tim, can we put that to you? You have a response?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a coherent answer. I'm sure we need to talk it through with the construction team. My vision would be that this would be work from the top side, working back. I know we had spent some time on the first application of kind of how do you extend the culvert, and are you in the water? Are you in the street? Are you on the right of way? My vision for this would be that you're up on the slope, or call it above the outfall and working your way back. Certainly, if there's a need for additional detail on kind of the sequencing of that, or what this treatment needs, does it need erosion control matting? Does it need something special to make sure it gets established? We can certainly take a look at that, but don't have a great answer on construction sequencing. We'd have to talk through with the construction team on what their vision was, but from my seat, it would be working, from the south, kind of reaching down, pulling yourself back up and away from the water course.
Yeah, and we can, with that interface of the, re-armoring that bank for the spillway from the discharge, there'll be a need for some type of cofferdam or sandbag barrier to separate the stream flow from the work zone. So we can work with Langen and the construction team and providing details for that sequencing of construction.
Yeah, so I just highlighted that, kind of what that area could look like in red. Dean and I worked on a project in Windsor where we had a very similar outfall to an active water course. So we could certainly provide some details in the response of kind of what that looked like. There certainly is a need to push that flow to the north so that you've got some dry land to get that kind of, they'll call it the first course of stone in at the southern edge, and work with, tie into that existing armoring that's there.
Yeah, I mean, that particular area, as you've mentioned, is not under our review.
Right.
But it's just the amount of stormwater being generated from the site, and considering the current impairment of Eagleville Brook, it's and I think it's something we're focusing on just because of those concerns. And just, there's a sentence in your report that maybe you could clarify about the capacity of the stormwater system, where the part of the report says, in the case of larger storm events, additional flows beyond the capacity of the system will be directed overland, away from sensitive features and safely downstream. All models were conducted using a critical flow rate under the 10-year storm event. I just want to clarify the capacity and the modeling was for what storm event that was for.
So then that would be for the pipe network itself. So that would be that was the answer to the question from before. So pipe network for 10-year, the system itself for 100. And what we typically want to happen is, if we have a storm that exceeds call it the capacity of the pipe network or the inlets, you don't want the water into the building. You want to make sure that there's the ability for it to get away from the building, either into the roadway network or overland over various kind of reinforced areas or treatment areas that would be installed as part of the construction.
But just because the system, when you say it's 100-year, that's the underground retention system is 100-year, but the
Yeah,
pipe-
so the best way I try and describe it is the underground detention system is to take hurricanes. The pipes and the catch basin take thunderstorms. So the detention system is large quantities of water over a 24-hour period. The pipes and the catch basins are for those flashy, how fast is that water coming down, usually in a much shallower depth, but happening very, very fast. So they're two different kind of analysis in the stormwater systems. So that's the 10-year is looking at that thunderstorm flash. What happens? Can water get into a catch basin and can water move through a pipe? The detention system and that conveyance is, okay, it's going to rain for the next 24 hours and we're going to have 7.5 inches of rain. Can this system intake that water, process it and discharge it, as opposed to being overwhelmed from that large depth of rain?
Okay. I'm as a layperson, it just seems like the system is limited by the smallest part of that system, right? So the system, it sounds like the system is essentially a 10-year system, even though it has an incredible storage.
No, it's not, because the 10-year is if you saw an inch of rain in 4 minutes. In a thunderstorm, an inch of rain takes 2 hours, but it rains for 24. So you're moving more water, but you're moving it slower. So they're just, I don't know a better way to describe it. They're just two totally different analysis, in that a 10-year hurricane is rainfall over the course of a day. You've never filled that pipe because you're putting water into it slowly, even though it's sized for a 10-year thunderstorm where that blast is just huge gobs of rain coming down, essentially instantly.
Back him up on this one. What he's saying makes sense.
Thank you.
I missed the first part.
What did you say, James?
I approve that explanation. Yeah, what the flow rate, it's the instantaneous flow rate that the pipes can take is the 10-year event. That might just happen in an instant. So they're running storms with a distribution called the SCS type 3 distribution, which assumes it's very peaky, like this. A massive amount of water occurs at a very, very short period of time. That's what the pipes are handling. The underground storage is the accumulation of all the volume of rain occurring over a very long time. So they're two totally different ideas.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim, for the explanation. Sorry to.
No problem. Making me sweat.
Anything further from CHA, from Rick or Chuck? Okay, any questions or comments from commissioners for our peer review or for the applicant?
I
John?
had a couple. Oh, sorry. Should I go?
Well, he's unmuted.
Go ahead, James, and then John, you're next.
Okay, sorry about that. I had 3 annoying requests for more detail. In the report, it says the rain gardens were conservatively given a curve number value of 86, but that implies almost 2 inches of water storage, which is a massive amount of water. And I just also was thinking, oh, it would be really great to see a detail of what the rain garden, or I'm sorry, the green roofs are actually going to be. I said rain garden at green roofs, because that's sizable.
Yes, and we are working with the architect on that detail, and we'll be able to back that up. So,
Perfect.
forthcoming.
Second one was, there's a summary section at the end of the reports that talks about the water quality volume. And I know that the water quality volume isn't actually being met because there isn't much opportunity to infiltrate, but that section says the design will achieve 80% suspended sediment removal. And I was just curious, is that 80% equivalent to the suspended sediment removal you would anticipate if you had met the water quality, the water quality volume target?
I'll write that down. I'm not sure of the,
Okay.
how to,
And then last annoying question, a lot of the flow reductions were based on the presumed curve numbers for the different land uses, but then it also says there's like rain gardens and I think it says there's some other structures not accounted for in the water quality volume section. And I was just curious if any of that other stuff was considered in the peak flow attenuation calculations. It looks like no, it's just all on top. But the model output's like 10,000 pages and I didn't go through it all.
okay,
That's all my questions.
great.
A couple of questions. I just wanted to follow up. I guess James mentioned rain gardens. Are there rain gardens here? I mean, they can be done and they can be rather effective and they can be fairly close to buildings, but it looks like the slope is maybe too big for effective rain gardens here. Is that right?
Yeah, let me find the right slide. We've got one proposed on site B out in kind of the call between the building face and the curb line. So there is a rain garden on site B. There is not a rain garden on site A. So
Okay, I
that's
mean,
what this is, yeah.
as you know, rain gardens can be quite effective, and Yukon, has sort of been a leader in the field here in terms of integrating rain gardens with green roofs in an urban setting. But there's going to be slope constraints on this, so I'm glad to see that that's there. The second question is, what's the plan for the steep slope on the north side of A there? I guess we had that on a picture there earlier here, and I guess that's where there's going to be the riprap and discharge there. I'm wondering that now that slope is currently forested or mostly forested, and as a result of the construction here, is any of that going to be left intact, or is that going to all have to be revegetated? Yes, that area.
Revegetated as part of the work to get the discharge in. And I mean, Dean, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I could look. A lot of the work would also come from the enhancement to remove invasives, right? That's also part of that slope work includes that disturbance as well, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And there is maybe about a quarter or maybe slightly less of the far western end of that area is remaining untouched. In this graphic, you can see the proposed tree line.
Yeah.
So, and I haven't actually had a chance to look at the landscaping plan here, but I'm assuming, or I would certainly not recommend this to be a lawn area, and to, in keeping with the general recommendation near streams like Eagleville Brook, headwater streams, that it should be revegetated in a, without lawn, and hopefully mostly forest, that it certainly currently is. But I don't know, what is the landscaping plan here? In general, the recommendation is, buffers around small brooks like this to be reforested.
Yeah, the general scheme is to replant this fairly densely with native trees and shrubs to reestablish, forested buffer habitat.
Okay. It just doesn't sort of show that in that schematic there. It looks like mostly lawn with a few scattered trees.
Yeah, we need to
we do
probably
have
touch up
detail.
our graphic depiction, but that whole shaded area, cross-hatched area is going to be planted, so.
Okay. That's it.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add one thing. I think one of the, like I said, we'll work on the graphical representation, but what we're merging the landscape plan with the restoration plan. So I think from the landscaping palette, that's what we're showing on this graphic, but it doesn't necessarily represent the density of trees and shrubs that are being planted in that zone.
Yeah, Dean, here was the plant schedule. I don't know if you wanted to run through any of the species, but we do have at the back of the set, we do have a full planting plan. And we've worked with Dean on kind of what would be in that enhancement zone from a plant species standpoint.
Yeah, so this planting schedule represents the crosshatch, and then in addition to that, what you're seeing graphically represented for trees and shrubs are associated with the landscaping plant schedule, and they both rely on native species suited for that locale.
This is for site A or site B or both?
This is site, we have a schedule for both site A and for site B. This is the schedule for site A.
Site A.
Are the species much different for B?
Just slightly, the B is a much smaller area, so the quantities are significantly reduced, and we've changed the species distribution just slightly.
Yeah, this is the B right now.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Right, Chad. You're on.
So a question I have for the commission is, in some of our more recent languages, and with the addition of Mike to staff, we have introduced language about the town of Mansfield performance standards and the 25-foot, 50-foot, and 150-foot upland review areas. Part of this project was before the commission prior to our knowledge of that. And so I'm wondering about, should we include that language in this one or not? Because I can put up what I have drafted right now. Let me do one of these numbers so it all shows up in the same place.
I've missed a few meetings, so the 25 and 50 of that.
So to catch you up, one of the zoning regulations are a magical document with many things hidden deep inside of them. And one of the things deep in our performance standards is that there's a line that says, wherever feasible, there shall be a non-disturbed buffer of woody vegetation, of natural vegetation, within 50 feet of all wetlands and watercourses. That's been in our regulations for a while. It's a pre-existing standard, but as a part of attempting to institute a more universal riparian corridor buffer regulation, that's something that I've pulled out and has been a focus lately. And I think it is pre-existing standard. It's very reasonable to bring it to the attention of wetlands and planning and zoning to remind them that wherever feasible on these project sites, there should be woody buffer if it's appropriate, natural buffer where you can have it.
Yeah. Was that 25 or 50?
50 foot.
And it's in all.
Wherever
zones?
feasible, all wetlands and watercourses. That's a universal performance standard.
And that goes back to.
I don't know exactly how far, but it was at least 2019. There was a revision in 2019 and it was in that. I haven't gone through the full record of all of the changes, but it's pre-existing. So, of course, that language, wherever feasible has both literal terms and when these things go to court about what is prudent and what is feasible is about both money and fiscal capacity. But it's reasonable to ask the applicant for any project to make significant standards and concessions for these kinds of things. Fortunately, the planting plan schedule shows a significant buffer in that area, which is not built. So that is part of it. And of course, when you have sites that are being redeveloped, that is another standard for consideration. But
Sure. Yeah, that was my next question, was not that we need to define feasibility, but that's what that recommendation hinges on, is it a prudent and or is it a reasonable, feasible alternative?
Right.
But we did.
I'm all
but
for,
we did recommend that an applicant at the last meeting have to consider that B and C.
Yeah, I think since it was already
You're
there.
right. I
When
thought,
this
yeah, no, I
application
missed.
was in,
yeah,
we can-
The standard has been there for
Yeah,
years,
that's
you know,
It's not a new standard, so I say we just approve it.
Okay,
I think we have to.
Yeah, I think let's
Yeah.
elevate that as much as we can.
Well, we have to be.
in our-
so what I have drafted is, we can read on the screen, but I'm just going to highlight, and it's hidden on mine. This is the. How come I didn't grab it? Let me try again. This is the language. So it's there, I'm retaining it. And then the first two lines express, you know, kind of our concern about that. The first two bullet points here. And then we get into things that are more specific to this project. So additional detail regarding the green roof, including the type, the components or plants, and interaction with the site's overall stormwater systems. Next bullet is speaking to the use of native species, discouraging use of hybrids, varieties, and so forth. We have included this in the past, and I think some of these recommendations are in play with the green roof. But considering LID practices 2 through 8 on the town's checklist. It's always nice to say something positive, so we have a positive bullet recognizing the vegetative roof and removal of invasive species along the stream bank, replacement with natives as of value to Eagleville Brook. And then we had right at the end of flurry of activity requesting more detail. And James, I would appreciate if you would give A, B, and C a look through and make sure I captured what you were saying.
Yeah, for A, it's really like 1.67, not 2, but I think that's okay. You just put like squiggly 2. Like, yeah,
Some people.
yeah, that's good.
Ooh.
People I talk to.
Jewish.
Yeah, that's good. They're all good.
Okay. And then John's landscape plan for, I think that was John, about revegetation.
Two things or 2.5 things that occur to me. One is that that all peer reviewer comments are adequately, or in the IWA's eyes, all peer review comments are adequately addressed by the applicant. Or some version of that.
Up above, you mean in that preamble?
No, I
No,
think
that
our
will-
recommendations are that we've done that in the past, that all peer review comments need to be adequately addressed, or that we're recommending that permits are not issued until consensus is reached, or that the comments are resolved by one party or the other.
Something like that. This is
Well, I
where,
thought it would be in one of your
Oh, in
recommendation
a
bullets. In the,
You
okay,
can make the first sentence here, a bullet right above.
like that with one of those magical backspacey deals.
and the other one I would say is that I think it seems like the green roof system is a huge part of the stormwater attenuation, and that there's a clear operations and maintenance plan for those systems, and that's clearly understood by the town, how they're going to be maintained for their, whatever performance standard they will have.
So like to,
But there's well, what's your point on the green roof, considering the green roof? I'd say under your third bullet, you could just add it to that bullet that pertains to the green roof, that an O&M plan, operations and maintenance plan. for the green roof. And that makes me think of the hydrodynamic separators, which that just seems to be a standard thing, that an O&M plan is provided for those.
They did have that as part of their own plan.
Or one of your comments is about the accessibility of a vac truck in order to be able to clean them, so that'll be addressed as part of the other comments that were been made.
Anything else? I think you did a good job,
You did a
Chad,
great
catching everything.
We need to take Chad out one night. We need to take Chad out of the time.
I think this is the longest one we've done.
Yes, they are getting a little bit longer.
Projects are more complicated.
So I would agree with that as well. Okay, so it doesn't all fit on the screen unless I make it tiny. There it is.
Does
I brought my glasses, so I can still read it.
your name's in there? Are you making the motion or?
Typically, when I do all of this, I'm okay putting my name up as I'm moving and
Okay.
looking for a second then.
We have a second?
I got one.
Meg seconds.
Okay,
Any further comments from commissioners on this motion? No, ready to vote? All those in favor, say aye or raise your hand if you're remote. Aye. Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes unanimously.
I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, everybody. I know you've been here once already and you're back again and you'll be back again. So not to us, but to somebody else. But thank you for the clear presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for all of your time and effort on this. We appreciate your input.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks all. Great. Thanks, folks. You too.
Thank you, Rick.
Good evening.
Right, yep.
Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
You're welcome.
Chuck, can I trouble you for your details here so I get you the
Sure.
minutes?
Okay, and that brings us to basically the end of the
Pull it up, just your name, so I
agenda.
Spell it correctly.
chair. We're through both of the items of new
Yep.
business. Unless there are reports from members, I can discuss the fact that we have no communications.
And no agent approvals or anything like that?
Wetlands approvals have
I
been
don't know what
really
else.
slow. So in terms of the things I've actually been doing for wetlands, I've been examining a lot of the zoning permits, and checking off to see if they need wetlands review, a lot of stuff outside of the wetlands review area. The last actual wetlands approval I issued was, I think, June 5th. The most recent thing that people will be concerned about or interested to learn about, on 619 Mansfield City Road, there's two large former farm ponds that are right before, a little bit before you get to the White Oak apartments, about 2 minutes down the road to the south. Those ponds, there's been a limited permit given for some maintenance around those ponds. There was at one point a pipe that had beaver dam had been built up over it. So that was removed with a little bit of excavation from the land as part of routine maintenance of existing structures. And now there's some proposed mowing of the area around the pond, but no direct pond impacts. There's going to be a house built on the property about 100 feet from the edge of the wetlands. So all of that is coming down the pipeline. So it's taking an area that has previously been very wild and unmanaged and making it a bit more of a managed wetland. But at least in my opinion, it's not really going to be a detriment to the wetland itself. We're not seeing any direct impacts on anything such as the flow of water in or out. Not seeing much impact on the actual banks, so I'm not overly concerned. I'm hoping that some of the improvements they're intending to make will be good for wildlife. They're not removing all the dead trees in the area, which are useful as woodpecker habitat, things like that. So it's hopefully going to remain a thriving little pond ecosystem. That's the fun one. Other than that, it's been permitting.
So that's,
Laura Gailey is the property owner.
so the ponds are on a different property.
Yes, the property lines and the GIS there are incorrect. We have surveys of the property lines. We have an AC survey, but those from the tax map are just not correct.
Well, 'cause I thought the ponds were on an ag easement piece of property.
That parcel, no, not as far as I
The
am.
other piece down on
The
Brown.
other piece down on Browns is, yes, but those are separate parcels. The individual who owns those, I believe, owned this parcel as well, but sold it to the current owner. So there's been a bit of back and forth between those two.
The one report I wanted to share is
No, that's okay.
Run away.
Thanks.
Take care, guys.
Pleasure to meet
You
you.
too.
Thank you.
The one thing I wanted to share was that I attended the Water System Advisory Committee, which is this group that sort of is part of any new interconnections to the water line that comes down from Connecticut Water to Yukon. Right, it's what Quinn used to go to. So I meant to send you some stuff, the agenda and a follow-up email that was from that conversation. Just for people's, to inform everybody. So I think I'll send it for the next meeting, for the next packet. There was a question about an interconnection and whether it was a considered an interconnection or an extension of the main line, which is technically not described in the MOA or the MOU between Yukon and Connecticut Water. So there was a lot of conversation about the legality of this extending the water line or potentially extending the water line up to that property, the proposed development up in the golf course area, sort of next to you, that the stub, if they continue it, it sort of can be construed as a new line as opposed to
Well,
just an interconnection. So I'll pass that along.
makes sense.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We've had a couple people who there was right at the edge of the water pipeline zone, because we have the water pipeline overlay zone in town. There was a recommendation. There was a property owner who was interested in potentially seeing a development come in, but it's right outside the zone, and that has caused a whole dispute between the potential developer and the potential property owner on whether or not it can go through, even to get the water in for the development. So that's very early in the process. That may kill the whole thing in the cradle. So
Yeah, I think that's the concern or the reason for the overlay zone to begin with, was to prevent sprawl. And it's already happened a little bit where, like DEEP required that a condo association of Wilmington needed water and had to interconnect. So that was kind of an unintended, and it's a good solution, but the potential for it to create more development than it was originally intended, I think that was always a concern. So,
That's what we're seeing. Seems to be happening.
seems to be happening as we-
thinking of if there's any other reports you should be aware of since we last met in May. So with the course of the last 2 months, any other projects that have come in or ongoing activities that are really critical. I don't think there's much. It's a lot of, we have 6 to 8 major activities going on in town. A lot of what we're doing is just monitoring those and interfacing with the various applicant teams.
Right.
And trying to get some of these easement monitoring off the ground. If you are interested in walking the parcel with Lisa Harris, who we had today, and seeing that conservation easement, I can also arrange for that at some point this summer. She's normally out of town. She splits her time between the West Coast and here, so
Yeah.
it's sometimes difficult to arrange.
There is an easement, the ag property on 89, right?
Yes.
That's coming up.
That's the 22nd. Now, unfortunately I can't be there. I have to be in California for a wedding, but yes, I will be coordinating to make sure that the property owner is there to meet you. Parking is a little bit
Yeah, I
of a,
if we park up by this.
On Mount Hope Road.
yeah.
Or I was thinking even at 89, there's like a pull off. You could just
Yeah,
walk.
I think on the other side of the
people
road,
look at it, I
on
know.
89, yeah. Depending on which direction you come from.
Is there a new owner for the property that's interested in understanding the easements? and
Yes.
Potentially.
So you'll
Yes.
send us all that information so we can actually read it. 'Cause I think it's.
To give you the backstory on
Involved.
this property was in limbo for a long time. The new property owner is interested in, the easiest way for me to explain this is to be kind of the bridge caretaker to get this property in use for a farmer who can properly steward the land, because this property, in addition to being a conservation easement, their conservation easement has specific carves out for pasture land. So the goal is the property owner has a young farmer who they're working with. in particular, right now, one of the topics on the mind of the ag committee and the ag leases, as those are coming back up in the town, is particularly young farmers have a lot of difficulty acquiring land in Connecticut because of Connecticut's extremely high land values and the decline of the traditional family farm. Those who are trying to get into farming are having a huge amount of difficulty. So this individual is seeing that they can potentially clean up this property, get 9 acres of useful pasture land for certain animals for this individual, create a sort of lease situation where everybody can profit. But because there was a building that fell down and there was a whole bunch of rusted old troughs and farm equipment that's there that he wasn't allowed to take out until we authorized him to remove it because it involved going in with equipment to
Yeah.
get the old equipment out.
We looked at that property when we came to town, like
You did.
13 years ago,
Yep.
and we read the easement, and it was like, you can't.
It's ridiculous.
This is the Harry Kelly,
Exactly,
yes.
says you can't do anything.
Right.
It's super restricted.
This is the old Harry Kelly property.
It's really, it's very restricted.
So it's a gorgeous piece of property.
Earlier
It
easements
is.
were like just like forever wild, kind of, without
Mm,
realizing you could do, positive
Right.
management. of it.
Like what we saw today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Which
Or
belabor
farming,
that.
which is good.
So you think we'll have a regular meeting in August?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
So again, apologies for moving this a week. We were trying to get the folks moving on their
Yeah,
application.
yeah.
But yeah, I see no reason why we wouldn't be able to have a meeting in August at our regularly scheduled time as long as we have a quorum. So third Wednesday,
Be the 16th. Anybody
Be
think they'll be away?
I will be.
Two of you will be away.
International.
John will be
1,
away.
2, 3, 4, okay.
I'll be-
All right.
We
Well,
need 4. I think we need 4.
we just lost 5. So we're down to the last 4.
All right, I'll get it in writing tomorrow. I'll send an email tomorrow.
Yeah,
We'll,
I think that would be good.
get that
just to
done.
See if anybody's.
I guess I could potentially.
take time away.
All right.
Time away is important.
Potentially, we have a meeting on the 16th, but probably gonna have to adjust that for a quorum. it
Yep.
sounds like.
I could do it the following week,
Oh, one other staff report. Sorry, John, after you.
or he's leaving, not sure.
Are you waving goodbye or have a question?
Yes, I have to leave, so I'm gonna.
Just, John, one thing I wanted to tell you. So I'm moving forward right now because the dedicated riverine protections in our zoning regulations. That's been one of my projects. I'm moving forward with that. I'm in consultations with Taiki, who is our zoning consultant right now. We're actually starting to push model language for that, which involves an enormous amount of reading case law in order to make sure that I'm not doing anything that's going to get the town sued. So I'm honest about it. So it's we're working on case law right now to make it work with previous court opinions. But the hope is that we'll potentially have a draft of that in the next couple months.
Great,
That's
thank
awesome.
you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for moving that forward. That's really exciting. And for finding this 55-year-old,
It's just been in there.
they never decided to read the zoning regs.
Wherever feasible,
Is it zoning?
it's zoning. So it's in our zoning regulations. It's wherever feasible, natural vegetation 50 feet within all wetlands. So that's a very strong protection in a lot of ways, but at the same point, wherever feasible is up to the interpretation of the commission, right? So
It's just important that we have something which we didn't even know we had before, because I work in Massachusetts a lot. And it's the way they approach,
completely different.
the way they approach that near area to wetlands and water courses is very different in Massachusetts. and
Yep.
We don't seem to be. So now we seem to have some momentum on this and then what you've been working on, so.
Yeah.
I have a question about, there was a town meeting last night, which I did not make.
Yes, I can tell you about that.
Yeah, so at some point, will we be involved in that process or, okay,
So right now, what we have is we have 3 master plans because we love plans in the planning department. So we have a Parks and Rec master plan, which is all of our town land for recreation, both our parks, open spaces, as well as our recreational parks. And figuring out what the real costs of maintaining all of this land and all of the programs are. There has been a problem with understanding the real costs of the various programs that we're running through Parks and Rec, as well as a lot of the maintenance for our land gets done through our facilities and public works departments. and is part of their budget, but isn't accurately represented through the costs of Parks and Rec. And it's public money to do a public good, but it's not accurately representing to the public how we're spending the money and the cost of doing these great things. Everyone is very interested in Mansfield consistently with preserving open space, but preserving open space has costs. Particularly to maintain it and maintain our really great trail networks that we have, there are costs to it. We need people to feel confident that they're buying into things, knowing the full breadth of it, and how we can manage it properly. We have a signage plan coming through to redo the signs on all the parks. We are essentially what I'm trying to work on is for the next year's recreational trails grant is to try to get money for a master study for mountain biking in town. Mountain bikes in our parks has been a long, difficult thing in the past that caused a lot of controversy. We need to understand where it's viable, if at all, in order to plan around it. So
It's going through that too. A lot of
Yep.
state layouts.
so that's one part of the master plan. The other part is the facilities master plan. I don't know if you noticed this, but this building's already on its second life because this used to be a school. So there's only so much you can retrofit a building when the yeah, it's very cute in this room.
You know, they're desperate when they're drawing colors on benches.
We could nap there.
Yeah. There's only so much you can retrofit this. We just built the first net zero school in the state. And it's gorgeous and the grass is mostly growing. And
I wish I had pictures of
we
this one.
have a bunch of aging buildings. So the facilities master plan is to figure out what our path forward is for all of our buildings and all of our facilities. And what are we going to do with the community center? Because for a community of our size, having the community center of that size is unusual. Another
Been a
problem.
dream for a long time.
It's been a dream since it.
Well, one of the issues is, to get on my planning high horse for a second, is that towns are very good at getting into a problem where it feels necessary and like a moral good to fix something that's really wrong, but then, and will allocate the money for that, but then fails to allocate the money to maintain it over the next 25 years, shortening the life overall, which is why we need these things to understand what's the actual cost of getting these facilities up and running, how do we do it, what are our mill rates. The third thing we're doing is the Northwest Neighborhood Plan, which is probably the most direct impact for the Conservation Commission, which, as I'm sure you've noticed, the Four Corners area has gone a little bit insane with development compared to how it was even when I was here in Yukon. So the impact that we'll have on the people who live in that area is significant, to say the least. And there's looking like there's going to be 1,000 units of housing up there if everything were to go through. All of those folk who live there now and the folk who live there now and all the folk who are going to live there deserve to have a community that works for them, that works for the character it takes and to understand where it's going. Because of the big changes. Plus, the old elementary school has closed. So one of the big draws of that upper corner of the town has changed significantly. How do we reuse that land? So as that corner evolves drastically, we need a plan. All of three of these are going to roll into our plan of conservation and development, which has to be updated by statute every 10 years. We last updated it in 2015. So 2025, we have to get the other one going. Which means I've arrived at a very interesting time.
You'll be busy.
Already am, but that's good. If it was boring, it would be not fun.
Sometimes boring's fun. All right, other reports? I don't know if we're in reports from commission members or communications.
The only report I have is I'm leading a walk this weekend. I forgot about it. Oh.
Don't say that. I got you to sign up for that.
Yeah. I'm leading a walk at Schoolhouse Brook about, about the beaver engineers over there. So.
Exciting.
No, I think that's it. If anybody doesn't have anything else, I'll make a motion to adjourn. James, glad you could be here. Thanks for your comments tonight. And we're adjourned.
Yeah, I'll try and get there in person one of these days.
Okay.
It's tough with toddler bedtime.
I get it. I've been there.
Yep.
Well, we'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot. We're adjourned at 9:29.
Perfect.